Hey guys, our devotion today is from 1 Kings chapter 11, and today we get to ponder about the question, what in the world would anybody need 700 wives for? But before we get into that, I want to remind you today, let's be in prayer for the Brown family. Roy, Jennifer, Case, Carter, Bailey, and little Dylan. We get to read a chapter here that is quite different from the last chapter we read out of Kings. In chapter 10, we saw Israel at a mountaintop experience. They had this king who loved God and who God had blessed. Solomon was walking in wisdom. He was trying to please the Lord. The people were wealthy. They were experiencing the blessings of God in a way that they never had before. And there were peace on all of their borders. They weren't feuding. They weren't fighting with anybody. It was the golden age in Israel. And it was because Solomon was walking after the Lord. And the Lord was faithful to what he had promised. That he was going to be their God. And he was going to take care of them. Well, certainly, in this chapter, we see a complete 180. And it's brought about by Solomon's change of heart. And although it is fast, it is quick, we see this change as Solomon begins chasing after these women. We understand that it's not just because it's a story that takes place in 1 or 2 chapters worth. It's not something that happened quick. We actually see Solomon up through the rest of his reign here, and it says that he reigned 40 years. It talks about him having 700 wives and 300 concubines. It takes a while to accumulate that many wives. Even still, 40 years. Solomon was pretty busy. I don't think there was probably very many weeks that went by that he wasn't looking for a new lady for himself. But we see Solomon's heart turning away from the Lord more and more, not just instantly, but beginning to chase after those little desires, satisfying his flesh, putting what he wanted before what God wanted. And over the process of time, he just got led farther and farther away until in the end, it seems like he didn't even care what God wanted anymore. He only cared about the ladies and what they wanted, about the gods that they wanted him to worship, and he was just doing things that he knew was completely wrong. I think part of what I get when I read this chapter is the importance of leaders seeking after God. We think about why leaders are held to a higher level of accountability. And I think we see part of that in this discussion here. Solomon, the king, the one who God said, I'm going to refer to him as my son. I'm putting him in charge over Israel. When he turned away from God, there was bigger consequences than there was for somebody else. If one of the Israelites, Bill Israelite, had decided one day, I'm going to go find me a wife from another country, I'm going to worship their gods, he probably would have been punished. He may have lost his life for such a sin. Maybe some of his family would have experienced the consequences of that decision. But here we see the king turning his heart away and doing this and just going. Solomon just ran into sin. Just committed himself, obviously. He didn't just marry a few wives. He went in and he found, was there a nation that Solomon didn't marry a lady from and start worshiping her God? We don't know. And we see the consequences for the leader falling were huge. The nation is literally, God says, it's going to be ripped away from Solomon. The tribes are going to be taken away, and Solomon's going to be left with one tribe. And of course, it's going to be his son, Rehoboam, who's going to reign in his place. And we know that the tribe is Judah that he's left with. But the nation is ripped in half. This is incredible. It's like the kingdom's almost taken away from him because of this. And think about the impact that his decision to worship these other gods, this is something that Israel is going to struggle with from now on. This is going to be the main thing, really, that just drives them away from God. And Solomon really brought this in here. I mean, this is something that had happened before, but Solomon really just indulged in it in a brand new way, and the ramifications are going to be so far-reaching. I think I also see God's grace and mercy in here, and leaving Judah because of David is through his grace, and this is where Christ is going to come through this lineage. So we see this act of mercy by God, and I think it's really cool that that's the line that Jesus comes through. It's all about God's mercy. It's not about how good any king was, but just God's mercy and his pleasure in David, and God wanting to bring salvation through David's lineage. I think the last thing that really crosses my mind in this is for us to contemplate where our hearts are and ask God to protect our hearts from being drawn away into other things like it happened to Solomon. And it may not be something that is an overnight thing. It may be a long stretch of period where we begin to gratify what we want. We begin to look after our own desires. And more we're just led farther and farther away from the Lord. I think it can be a deceptive thing. I think Solomon certainly knew what he was doing, but I wonder if over that stretch of 40 years, if he just kind of walked into it and let himself be deceived, and by the end he didn't even know what he was doing anymore. But I think it's a good prayer for us to have today. Lord, show me where I'm drifting away from you. Protect me from that. Protect my heart. Help me keep my eyes on you. But anyways, I hope this passage is a blessing for you guys today. God bless.